Hello everybody and welcome back to the Not Applicable Formula 1 channel. I hope that you're well. The long-awaited return of Formula 1 saw the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Some huge changes, the removal of free practice, the new sprint on the Saturday. The drama must have been incredible, right? Well, not so much. Let's break it down. Let's talk about my 3 winners and 3 losers from this weekend. Let's start with my first winner, which is actually going to be Ferrari. This might be a bit of a surprise considering they didn't come out on top in the sprint and they didn't come out on top in the Grand Prix either, but it was the first time that we've seen the Ferraris, particularly Charles Leclerc, have a race without an incident or a penalty. I think you could argue that Charles Leclerc has had the worst start to the season of any driver, and most of it has been completely out of his hands. Like, it's not his fault. He can't help that his engine blew up in Bahrain, or that he then had to take a penalty in Saudi Arabia after an incredible qualifying. But this weekend, he managed to actually pick up a pole position in the sprint qualifying and the Grand Prix qualifying too, just to remind us of how great he is on one lap and just how much pace that Ferrari does have when it's pushed to the limit. You could, if you're being incredibly harsh, say that he was a bit of a loser because in both of the races this weekend, he lost places, but that was to the Red Bulls, and the Red Bulls are just in a different league in terms of their race pace. The Grand Prix saw him finish 20 seconds off Sergio Perez, but he even said that's the best he could have possibly done. Charles getting on the podium in the sprint and the Grand Prix as well finally gets his season rolling, and for me, that has to be a win because his season effectively starts from now. I suppose Carlos Sainz didn't look to be having the most fun this weekend, but again, I don't think you can have too many complaints overall either. Finished 5th in the sprint race, finished 5th in the race as well in a Ferrari car that wasn't really built for race pace, keeps him 5th in the championship. Caught sleeping a little bit by Fernando Alonso after the safety car, however. But then if you look at what happened in Australia and losing those points, he's back on track with being a consistent points finisher for Ferrari, and that's exactly what they need from him. Overall for Ferrari, this weekend felt like a good step forward in their season. Loser number 1, it's going to be Alpine for me, more specifically Gasly than Ocon, although neither of them had a good weekend. After Australia, where Gasly put in a stunning performance for all but 2 laps, he had that break, had time to reset, and coming into Azerbaijan, a track where he's been really good in the past, remember? 2021, he was on the podium for AlphaTauri. Last year, he came home in 5th place, which was his best performance of the entire 2022 season. I had high hopes for Pierre coming into this weekend, but it all fell apart very quickly. It just felt like every session there was something that went wrong for him. The free practice, Alpine went back to its 2022 form of being on fire and producing smoke from every single inlet. The team then rushed to get the car back together again as quickly as they can to get him out for Friday qualifying, only for him to hit the wall in Q1. He then had issues in SQ1, meaning he qualified in 19th for both races, and from there he was never going to be able to do anything really. On the other side of the garage you had Ocon, who at least got through to Q2 and SQ2, which has to be the minimum for Alpine, being either inside of that top 10 or just on the outside of it. But then it was all in vain as the team had to make changes to the car's suspension setup whilst it was in parc ferme, which then resulted in Ocon starting from the pit lane, not only for the sprint race, but for the Grand Prix as well. Ocon then pitting on the final lap of the Grand Prix nearly killed some of the press in the pit lane, which could have been awkward. They are still 6th in the constructors' standings, just behind McLaren, who sit in 5th place, but I think looking at how badly it went this weekend will only add to the frustration of not picking up points in Australia. Like, if they had an extra 14 or 16 points, then this weekend goes down as one of those weekends and they just kind of forget about it. But without those points, this goes down as a massive disappointment. Moving swiftly on, my second winner, and I think he might have been in the winners category of every single Grand Prix so far this year, is Fernando Alonso. The love story between Alonso and Aston Martin continues as again he picks up a great result for the team. Aston Martin looking at Fernando Alonso last year and thinking you belong with me has to be a stroke of genius. Like, think back to December and neither of them could have seen it going as well as it has. The Spaniard sits in 3rd place in the Drivers' Championship after finishing 4th in the labyrinth that is Baku. It just felt like Alonso was one step ahead of the rest throughout the race. He left so many other drivers thinking would've, could've, should've, which is easy to say now in hindsight, like after the fact, but holding onto those medium compound tyres so well at the start, meaning he could pit after Hamilton and benefit from the safety car, was gorgeous. Before then being Carlos Sainz's anti-hero after the safety car and catching the other Spaniard sleeping, it has to be said, with a great move up the inside. Like, I can't imagine in my wildest dreams there'll be any bad blood between the two of them, but especially especially if Carlos Sainz is going to leave that kind of blank space for Alonso to go for. He's going to go for the position and he's going to take it from you, and then he just disappeared into the distance like a getaway car. Call it what you want, but Alonso just seems to have so much style and happiness when he's driving that Aston Martin car this year, and I'm so enchanted by his performances so far this season. If this was a movie, I know that we're in the end game of Alonso's career in Formula 1, but still he is delivering at the top level, and for me, being just outside of the top 3 is making him king of my heart after Baku. I suppose he could be a little bit annoyed that he didn't get onto the podium this weekend. He did manage to actually catch Charles Leclerc towards the end of the Grand Prix, after probably being surprised, to be fair. I imagine he saw the back of the Ferrari come around the corner and thought, I forgot that you existed. But he has to be happy, still looking at Alpine and thinking, I bet you think about me. And there's a lot of podiums still to come this season. Like, he could still end the year with 22. This is the silliest section that I've ever written. There are over 20 Taylor Swift references in there for you to find, all right? But let's move on. Loser number 2, and I cannot think of a worse weekend from any team this year. Alfa Romeo, what is going on? I don't think there's a single positive that they can take away from this weekend. Maybe the fact that Bottas was there with Piastri and Albon at the start. He gets clipped, which he could do nothing about, fine, but it didn't look like it caused any real damage to the car, and if it did cause some damage, the amount of damage didn't justify the lack of pace. Even at the end of the Grand Prix, Bottas came in for another stop, put on some medium tyres whilst everybody else was running on very old hard tyres, and still he was there by himself at the back, not catching up to anybody else, ending up finishing last of the finishers. Whilst we mentioned finishers, Joe wasn't one of them. From what I've read, Joe made contact with the race wall, causing damage to the car, although we didn't actually get to see it on the coverage, so I'm not too sure how that happened. The damage that was then picked up then caused him to come into the pit lane, and the team opted to retire the car from 16th place. The weekend as a whole for the team was awful. The car just isn't developing. They brought 3 track-specific upgrades for this weekend, and still they were so slow in a straight line. They were the slowest in the speed trap through Australia as well, so maybe this shouldn't have been a surprise, but Bottas's 4 points in Bahrain are flattering them now. They are by far and away the worst car on the grid for me. Like, Williams and AlphaTauri, over the course of all 4 races, have shown much more. Winner number 3, and it's a little bit of a cop-out from me, I'm not going to lie to you, but I'm throwing best of the rest out there because I want to talk about Lando Norris and Yuki Tsunoda for picking up points outside of the top 4 teams. It was a little bit frustrating to watch them both sit in that DRS train behind Ocon and Hülkenberg for basically the entire Grand Prix, but both of them had to pit eventually, even if it was the last lap of the race, and that meant Lando Norris jumped up into P9, Yuki Tsunoda jumped up into P10, and I jumped up out of my seat. Let's talk Lando again, showing that he's still the best out-and-out racer outside of the top 4 teams. A couple of little upgrades brought from McLaren this weekend as well just seemed to click, allowing Lando Norris to get through to Q3 and SQ3. Awkwardly, I don't think McLaren thought it was going to go that well, as they didn't have a new set of softs for him to use in SQ3. They then opted to use those softs instead during the sprint race, which was a massive mistake, but thankfully the sprint no longer affects the Grand Prix, and on Sunday he was excellent. Then there was Yuki, who's just continuing this incredible run of form that he's found himself at the start of this 2023 season. Okay, the sprint Saturday didn't go very well at all. He was so unlucky to get dropped out of SQ1 though, the red flag waving when he was about, 200 meters away from the start-finish line? But similar to Norris, it was Sunday where it really mattered, and he drove really well. Like, the last 4 races, he's finished P11 twice, and then P10 twice, and he's found a real rhythm in this AlphaTauri car this year. If he can keep that rolling, we're going to see him have a great season. He's going to constantly pick up points in that AlphaTauri car, and if the AlphaTauri car can develop, maybe he can do even better. My third and final loser though, and it's actually going to be his teammate. It couldn't be anyone other than Nick de Vries after this weekend. What on earth is going on inside that helmet? It's weird to be so negative around de Vries, considering he is a rookie, but he's a weird kind of rookie. Like, he has a lot of experience behind him. Everyone talks about Formula 2 winner and Formula E winner, but what's more relevant to Formula 1 is that last year he drove like 4 of the 10 cars on the grid over the course of the season in tests and practice sessions, and of course that points finish in Monza that has elevated the hype around him massively. I'm not even saying he's a bad driver, but he just can't seem to get this season going in his favour. Actually, not even the season, just like a session that he can come away from and be like, that was really, really solid. That was really good. He puts it into the wall in qualifying, meaning he starts in 20th place for the Grand Prix. And actually, the only lap time he did was outside of the 107% rule too. Then in the sprint shootout, he qualifies in 20th again. Manages to move up to 14th, mainly due to others' mishaps and mistakes rather than his actual pace. And then in the race, he hits the wall again. breaks the suspension of the front left tyre and has to retire from the Grand Prix. To be fair to him, he came out and said he screwed up and he's paid the price, and he knows that it isn't going very well for him, and he hasn't started lashing out or blaming the team in any way, but he's 20th in the championship for a reason, and he's definitely been the 20th best driver on the grid. I hope that he can find a little bit of form just for his sake, because I don't think he's going to be on the grid next season. Honourable mentions: Sergio Perez should have probably been in this top 3, winning the race and the sprint race, but Red Bull are just so good right now that I wanted to speak about some of the other drivers out there. Although Verstappen could have definitely been a loser, having a whinge about the format of the weekend, arguing with George Russell and then losing out to the safety car too, wasn't great from Max. Lance Stroll could have easily been a loser, but it was only one mistake that cost him his 6th place to Lewis Hamilton. George Russell a loser, maybe, for being called a dickhead and a princess by Max Verstappen? I don't know, maybe? Like, clutching at straws here. Overall, it was a little bit of a drab race weekend, considering it was the first ever sprint Saturday. The hard tyres were just so ridiculous in terms of their degradation. It took over 40 laps for them to actually start falling off in any way whatsoever. So everyone, as soon as they were on the hards, it just became a little bit of a parade, but it was nice to see Formula 1 back and get us rolling with 4 races in the next 5 weekends. Let me know your winners and losers in the comments down below as always. Whilst you're down there, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll see you next time.